Okay, let's unpack this. Get this. We've got this almost unbelievable situation here. A U.S. resident mistakenly deported, and now it seems like both the U.S. government and El Salvador, the country he was sent to, are basically refusing to help him get back.
It sounds like something out of a movie, honestly. Yeah. It really does.
It almost does, yeah.
And it shines a light on some pretty serious systemic issues. Today we're diving into the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He's a Maryland resident, had protected legal status.
Right.
And just found himself caught in this incredible mess after being wrongly deported to El Salvador.
Yeah, and we've been digging through the sources, news reports, court documents, mainly trying to piece together the sequence of events, the key legal points and what everyone involved is saying. Our goal here really is to understand how this happened, why it happened, and why this case is, frankly, something everyone should know about.
Absolutely.
So where does this whole unbelievable story actually kick off?
Well, it really starts with the mistake itself, the initial action. According to the documents we looked at, on March 12th, Abrego Garcia was just driving home. He had his 5-year-old son with him.
Okay.
And he was stopped by ICE agents. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they told him his immigration status had changed and took him into custody right then and there.
And things escalated incredibly quickly after that, didn't they?
Oh, astonishingly fast.
Yeah.
Just 3 days later, March 15th, he's on a plane to El Salvador.
3 days. Wow.
Yeah. And he was part of this group that the U.S. government sort of labeled as alleged members of criminal organizations.
And the really shocking part, I thought, was where he ended up. This terrorism confinement center, CECOT, based on claims about MS-13 that a judge later called what? Unsubstantiated?
Yeah, exactly. Unsubstantiated. That's the key word Judge Sheeney's used. It's pretty stunning how quickly and severely they acted on those allegations without apparently strong evidence presented at that point.
And then the twist. Just 2 weeks later, roughly, end of March 31st, the Trump administration itself admits it.
Admits it was a mistake, yeah. An administrative error was the official term they used.
Why? What was the reason for the error?
Because, and this is crucial, Abrego Garcia had actually been granted protected legal residency status way back in October 2019. He legally shouldn't have been removable like that.
So, okay, a clear mistake. The government admits it. You'd think, story over? Right, bring him home. Fix the error.
You would absolutely think that.
But no. Instead, his wife has to file a lawsuit on March 24th, just demanding they bring him back.
Exactly. And this is where the legal battle really kicks into high gear. It really shows how the courts get involved when things go wrong like this. So April 4th, Judge Sheeney issues a pretty powerful ruling.
Okay, what did the judge say?
She stated very clearly, the arrest, the detention, illegal. And she ordered the government to get him back to ensure his return by April 7th, a clear deadline.
A direct order from a federal judge. Seems straightforward.
You'd think. But the Justice Department, they didn't just comply, they appealed the ruling.
They appealed. Against bringing back someone they admitted deporting by mistake.
Yep. And it gets even, well, odder. The administration's own lawyer, who was in court for that hearing, placed on administrative leave afterwards. Apparently for telling his clients about the judge's return order.
Wait, seriously, that detail alone? It suggests some serious internal conflict or maybe resistance to the order, doesn't it?
It certainly raises questions about what was going on behind the scenes. But the legal wheels kept turning. April 7th, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals looks at the appeal, denied it unanimously. And their language wasn't subtle. They called the government's actions unconscionable.
Unconscionable, that's strong.
Very. They said the government had, and I'm quoting here, no legal authority to snatch a person who is lawfully present off the street and remove him from the country without due process.
Powerful stuff from an appeals court.
Absolutely. Paints a picture of serious overreach. But even that wasn't the end of the legal fight. The administration pushed it further. They did. They took it straight to the Supreme Court, used the emergency docket, sometimes called the shadow docket.
Wow. All the way to the top.
Initially, Chief Justice Roberts put a temporary hold on things just to allow the full court to review. But then, April 10th, the full Supreme Court issues its decision. And again, Unanimous.
Unanimous again at the Supreme Court level?
Unanimous. That's a really significant point here. Yeah. They basically said, look, this guy Abrego Garcia had what's called a withholding order against removal to El Salvador.
Meaning
A legal decision had already been made previously that he shouldn't be sent back to El Salvador, likely due to potential danger there. So deporting him there was illegal on its face.
Okay, so doubly illegal, basically. First, the protected status, now this withholding order.
Right. And the Supreme Court agreed with the lower courts. The government must facilitate his release from custody in El Salvador and make sure his immigration case proceeds as if he'd never been deported.
Okay, facilitate. That seems like a clear instruction. A total legal win for Abrego Garcia, right?
You would certainly think so.
And didn't President Trump even say something publicly around then, April 11th, about respecting the court's decision?
He did. He made a statement expressing respect for the Supreme Court's decision regarding bringing someone back.
Yeah.
It really sounded for a moment like this whole ordeal might finally be ending.
Might be, but
then things get, well, murky.
Yeah.
And frustrating. April 12th, the very next day, Abrego Garcia's lawyers are back in court, essentially. They file papers saying the government is refusing to give him any info where he is, what his status is.
Refusing information.
And more importantly, that the government wasn't actually doing anything concrete to comply with all these court orders telling them to facilitate his return.
So stalling, despite the Supreme Court.
That's what the lawyers alleged. And then, April 13th, the administration files its own status report. And this is where their argument shifts again.
How so?
They acknowledge, yes, mistaken removal. But then they argue that Abrego Garcia is now supposedly ineligible for that withholding of removal status we just talked about.
Why? On what grounds?
Because, they claimed, MS-13 had recently been designated by the administration as a foreign terrorist organization, an FTO.
Huh. So, after losing in court multiple times based on his existing status at the time of deportation, they pivot to this new FTO designation related to the alleged gang membership.
Exactly. It raises, serious questions about the timing and the motivation. They admit the error, get told by the highest court to facilitate his return, and then suddenly this FTO designation becomes the new reason, potentially, to block it.
It really suggests a determination not to bring him back despite the legal rulings?
It certainly seems that way. And then you have the whole other dimension to this puzzle, El Salvador.
Right. What's their position in all this?
Well, on April 14th, President Bukele was actually at the White House, and he was asked directly about Abrego Garcia.
And what did he say?
He was incredibly blunt, said he would not help return him. He even asked rhetorically if he was supposed to, quote, smuggle him back, and added he wasn't fond of releasing terrorists.
Wow. So flat-out refusal from El Salvador, referencing the terrorism angle.
Pretty much leaves no room for doubt about his stance. And then you had Attorney General Pam Bondi adding that it's basically up to El Salvador whether to return him, not the U.S.
Which sounds like the U.S. washing its hands of the problem they created.
It certainly creates that impression. It sets up this impossible situation. The U.S. made the mistake, is legally told to fix it by facilitating his return, but the country they sent him to says no, and the U.S. says, well, it's up to them.
It's a complete catch-22. Just unbelievable.
It really is.
So let's talk about MS-13 for a second, because it seems central to the government's justification, even if the initial deportation wasn't based on proven ties. Where did this group even come from?
Sure. MS-13, Mara Salvatrucha 13, it actually started in Los Angeles back in the 1980s, formed by Salvadoran immigrants.
Right here in the U.S.
Yeah. And it's since grown, unfortunately, into a large transnational gang known for violence. President Trump talked about them a lot, made cracking down on MS-13 a big focus. So that context probably explains why that label was applied, even if, as the judge noted, it was initially unsubstantiated in this specific case.
Okay, but Abrego Garcia has a default against this specific allegation, right? It wasn't just a blanket denial.
Right. His lawyers pointed out that the specific MS-13 chapter, or clique, he's being accused of associating with is based in New York.
New York? But he's a Maryland resident.
Exactly. He maintains he's never even lived in New York. Plus, he emphasizes he lived in the U.S. safely for a decade without any criminal charges against him.
And crucially, let's not forget, he was granted protected legal residency status in October 2019. That fact seems to get buried under the MS-13 claims.
It does. And that's the core contradiction, isn't it? The administration admits the administrative error regarding his actual legal status at the time.
The status that should have prevented the deportation.
Precisely. But they keep bringing up the alleged gang affiliation, seemingly as a reason now to resist bringing him back, even after the Supreme Court said facilitate. It really makes you question how protected status holds up against unproven allegations after the fact.
So if we boil this down, we've got a definite mistake, an administrative error leading to deportation.
Check.
We have crystal clear, unanimous court rulings all the way up to the Supreme Court saying the U.S. government needs to facilitate his return.
Check. Unanimous.
And yet the reality on the ground is the U.S. government seems reluctant, shifting its arguments, and the president of El Salvador is saying absolutely not.
That's the knot we're left with. It's a perfect storm of bureaucratic error, complex legal battles, and international diplomacy, or maybe the lack thereof.
Yeah.
And the aha moment here, I think, is just seeing how a single error, likely a clerical one somewhere down the line, can spiral into this massive international incident with profound human costs. It really highlights the need for precision and accountability, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And it leaves us with this really nagging, provocative question at the end. Given that the Supreme Court of the United States unanimously ordered the government to facilitate his return, what's actually stopping them? What are the real-world limits on the government's power, or maybe its will, to comply with its own highest court when faced with political considerations or another country's refusal? What does this case truly tell us about that gap between legal authority and, well, getting something done in a messy geopolitical reality?
That's the question to ponder, the gap between the ruling and the reality.